This is Leadership Beyond, your community of conversation.
But this is the first time in my professional career that everybody, 100% of us, are consciously aware we are engaged in a change initiative.
Yeah, everything. I mean, COVID caused us all to go through change, right? At the same time, but our experiences were so different.
Facing these unprecedented times in isolation is pure insanity.
Paul LaLonde is a deliberate HR professional who believes philosophy is a difference-making pursuit in life and business. Learning, teaching, and being of service to others are his purpose. Currently, Paul serves as the VP of People and Culture for CEDA of Cook County, Inc. in Chicago, serves as an adjunct professor at Joliet Junior College, and manages his consulting and coaching business, HR Logic. Paul is an alumnus of the SHRM National Blog Squad, named the Social McColl's Most Inclusive HR Influencer list in 2020 and 2021, and a recipient of the 2021 HR Unite Community Award. Also a recipient of the 2021 Human Resources Today MVP Award for his blog, HR Philosopher. He is a proud husband, father, disobedient cat owner, Star Wars nerd, and metalhead.
I really like the way when we think about philosophy, there's a tendency to think of it as being something way out there or way up there. And I really like the way he grounds it in the everyday life of being better individuals, self-leadership, being better groups and teams, and seeing it all through the lens of employee experience. Really easy to understand, even though it's based on some pretty profound philosophy.
What I appreciate about Paul's conversation with us is how he has spent his career in the nonprofit community space, which gives a leg up, in a sense, to bringing a people focus first, because that's what those businesses are built on. A people focus serving the community. And what Paul does for us in this conversation is he helps to elevate the importance of that and the lessons that can be brought from nonprofit organizations to for-profit organizations. Welcome, Paul. Welcome, Paul. It's been a long time coming. We're so excited to have you on the podcast.
Hey, Adrian, thank you. And appreciate you and Tom asking me to be on, and looking forward to our conversation.
Great to see you, Paul.
You know, we're so excited to hear more about how you have taken your passion for philosophy and brought that into your longtime HR career, you know, and brought that to the leadership space. So would you start with just a little bit of your background, very, brief intro about your background, and more specifically, you've said doing HR right is an act of philosophy. So tell us a bit about what does that mean to you, and how do you bring that into the work you do?
Yeah, that's great. Currently, I am the Vice President of People and Culture at the Community Economic Development Association in Cook County, CEDA for short. It's a community not-for-profit community action agency, and we help low-income individuals try and get out of poverty and have a sustainable life. In addition to that, I also blog on the side and kind of do some my own side gig consulting through my small business, very small business, HR Logic. But I've been in the not-for-profit world my entire career, specifically in Chicagoland. So that's a little bit about me and kind of what drives me in my professional pursuits.
And what brought you to philosophy? How did you find that, and how has that changed your thinking and approach to things?
Right. In my blog, I wrote more in detail about a lot of this, so I hopefully encourage people to go and they can read more in detail. But once I was just kind of perusing a bookstore like I always do, and I noticed this small little book called by Sharon LaBelle, and it's actually a new interpretation of some old ancient Stoic philosophy by Epictetus. I didn't know anything about it. I was like, what does this even mean? So I just was like, all right, I'll grab it. It's in the bargain bin. And it kind of changed my entire perspective, because Epictetus, what he had said was, philosophy is not meant to be this grandiose, giant thing that confuses people. At the end of the day, philosophy is just about, how do I live a better life? How do I get the most out of myself and the people around me? And I started thinking, okay, how do I apply this to my personal life? But not only that, but professional life as well, because I don't believe that the two are really separate. So that was kind of my beginnings of diving into philosophy as a sort of changing agent for not only businesses, but not-for-profits and anybody in their professional lives.
So as I hear that, the emphasis being on wisdom and wisdom being practical, and you mentioned you started looking at what is a better life for me. So my first question is, can you give some examples that helped you to see the business application and particularly HR in not-for-profit?
Yeah. Part of what I learned in the book, and then learned more as I continued to read and research and all that, is uh, at the end of the day, you can only control one thing, and that is you know, how you react, what you think, what you learn, and how you apply it. So at the ultimate goal, to live a happy life, which means a prosperous life, not necessarily happy in our modern sense, but in a prosperous life, is to do the right thing as best you can. And if you don't, you know that you have the next moment and the next moment and the next moment. So I started thinking about that, and how do you apply that to failures that you have in business, or uh, particular things, like you didn't handle that conversation well, or maybe that termination didn't go as well as you want, or you didn't help an employee to get through a particular situation. So using that logic of just those small little buildable wins of what you can control at the end of the day was really kind of, I think, the gateway. Now, how I do that in my own, I think, professional doings is just trying to be a model for other people. I don't try and push it on others. I'd say this is what has helped me, uh, and hopefully, if I can continue to be successful and keep going forward, that can sort of rub off on other people. That's really, at the end of the day, how it got incorporated into the business side of things.
Well, the leadership beyond alignment there is just that we keep our eye on the best leader we can be, recognizing we are never that, but continuing to reach for it, which leads to better. And I think that's very consistent with your point about, you have to keep reflecting, how does this compare to the good as we understand it, and how can we come closer to it?
And you mentioned the virtue, and I think that is sort of the anchor to all of this, because knowing how to be good, you need to know which direction to go, right? And you lean on virtue, and specifically the four cardinal virtues, and don't need to get into down that rabbit hole right now, but it's important to talk about wisdom and knowing, okay, thinking about, how do I know what is wise and was the right thing to do? Thinking about temperance and figuring out not being overly bombastic, and uh, not trying to be like, I can't remember the guy's name who invented the DeLorean, but you know, he was brilliant, but he didn't temper himself. So then DeLoreans ruined him, essentially. So it's taking that and using that as the guidepost moving forward. And I like this idea too of, Tom, we were talking offline about the philosopher king. I sort of take that as the model for what I call like the philosopher manager, and really what I base my HR Philosopher blog on. It's not to be above other people. It's no, philosophers, true ones, are with the people and are the people. So doing what you do every day well is in and of itself an act of philosophy. So when I do HR well, I see that as being philosophical, and doing the right thing is part of that. So
Central
There's
to it. Go ahead.
yeah, there's so many tenets that resonate, I think, with our philosophy around a leadership beyond, right? Because we focus a lot on awareness, awareness of self, awareness of others, and I think a lot of that plays into with the way that you show up, Paul, and those thinkings taken from your own philosophy studies, and bringing people together to go together, not to lead from ahead, but lead next to, right? And that's a lot about, we talk about this, it's in every tenet of conversation that we have. I think if let's pivot to, I'm curious around your work in nonprofit and your nonprofit work. I mean, from I've never worked in nonprofit, so I think it seems to me from the outside looking in, like how rewarding that must be to know that the organization that you're working for is in existence to help others. And I think our followers and Tom and I, we're so grounded in service to others. And so can you talk a little bit about just what that means to you in surrounding yourself with, within a nonprofit organization, how that looks, from a just building of a community perspective?
I think you hit the nail on the head when it comes to finding folks that are looking to serve other people. I think that's the bedrock for a lot of not-for-profits, and a lot of the ones I've been involved with or have worked directly for. What we talk about from what does HR look like today? Was it going to look like tomorrow, and all that. One thing that constantly pops up is the employee experience, right? And trying to figure out
Mhm.
how do you attract those employees and bring them in. And one of the key measurements to all of that is to show them that their work matters on a higher level. This isn't like uh, the early 1900s. It's where everybody's on the assembly line and you're poking in there, and that's all you focus on. While that work is important in a lot of ways, you have to go above and beyond and to show them why it's important. Not-for-profits have that already built in to
Mm.
everything that they do. And whenever I consult with or talk with not-for-profit leaders, I say, that's your leg up. You already have that. So
Yeah.
millennials, and not to get generational, because I think everybody wants their work to matter, but millennials and the Gen Z that are coming into the workforce, that is high on their list compared to
Yeah.
necessarily others. I want my work to matter. So if you want to attract those folks, lead with that and show them the stories. Not-for-profits have to be really good storytellers to say, your work matters because we're doing XYZ in the community. So that's really, I think, one of the main things.
Do
Mhm.
you ever see a frustration in the human element where the person totally buys into the mission? They're passionate about it. They join because they want to help poor people get on their feet. And there's work that needs to be done. And the work feels disconnected from that mission. Because I think part of leadership is helping to keep the connections alive. In other words, I believe in the mission of this organization, but this, whatever they're charged to do, seems like a bunch of, if I could use a different word for manure, and to say they're still feeling the mission, but they're not feeling the connection between mission and work.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that it's a very good point that I think is sort of the challenge for all employers. There's a story that resonates with me, and it was I think it was John Kennedy was visiting one of the space centers. They're building it up in the budgeting space program, et cetera, et cetera. And he ran into a janitor, and he goes, "Hey, who are you? Thank him, the president, et cetera, et cetera. What do you do here?" And he obviously knew he was a janitor because he's wearing the uniform and all that. But the gentleman replied back, "I help put people on the moon."
Mhm.
And that
Right.
was, I think,
Powerful.
incredibly powerful, whatever NASA was able to do. Now, we're not all NASA because for various reasons, but so I can say data entry or even janitorial work at your local, whatever, not for profit. making them know that that connection is as important as actually being in the community. If you don't enter this data right, then
Yeah.
we can't get the reimbursement money to help this person keep their lights on. So what you do does have a direct effect. You are helping to alleviate poverty. It doesn't seem like it because you're in front of a spreadsheet, but your work matters on this level. And it's just, you have to have the good leadership and the people that see that connection to be able to make those points across to your staff.
Do you ever get into challenges with title and salary? Like, I think that there's with at least the nuance that you hear, right? In nonprofit, you're not in it for the money, right? And so it has to be this higher service, right? This higher mission. And but are there challenges where people are driven by the titles that they get and the promotions that they get and the amount on their paycheck, and so how are you balancing that from an HR perspective? Is it just the same of always, finding that way to connect them to the purpose of that mission?
Yeah, that is something that all not-for-profits, most, I should say
Hmm.
most, if not a majority of them, struggle with, right? I always use the example, we're not IBM, we're not Microsoft, we're not Google. We don't have those resources, and we won't, unfortunately. But that's not an excuse to stand behind, It's not an excuse to not pay people fairly. And I think that's the word, it's fairly. Um, Always encourage people, not-for-profit leaders, people are complex creatures, right? There isn't one motivational factor. There are multiple motivational factors. And while one rates higher, it doesn't mean that money isn't a motivator. It's just maybe less of a motivator in some ways. So it's trying to find that balance between all of it. So if you do pay fair wages and you do your market analysis, do whatever you can, and you can't go up, then where else can you?
Hmm.
And I think this is sort of an old school not-for-profit tactic, but it's sort of a trap that I think a lot are getting away from. But they used to give loftier titles as part of it. It didn't mean maybe much in the grand scheme of things of the organization, but to that person it did. So
Right.
that's one thing. I think education is another. It's especially with again, not to be generational, everybody I think wants some sort of form of education, but from a motivational standpoint, the younger generations put more premium on that. So what can you do to help with some educational,
Hmm.
professional development type of things, coaching to help them get to that next level? And I think part of that, all of that takes a lot of thought and a lot of uh, strategy to try and figure out. Again, making that connection to the philosophy stuff, because if you can be a really good philosopher, that hopefully can translate into how can you be a really different kind of a thinker and apply that to motivating people in different ways.
Well, when you mention people are motivated in different ways and have different drives, we had a little conversation before recording about predictive index. Can you say something about, and it's got to be twofold. It's not just the assessment, but it's the conversations that need to happen. So can you talk a little bit about your experience with using a tool to get those conversations going?
Yeah, Adrian had mentioned something earlier about self-awareness, and to me, any success, uh, true lasting success starts with self-awareness. You have to understand yourself, but that's only one part of the key. The second part of the key is you have to understand your team, understand the people you work with, and understand it as a whole. And predictive index is a behavioral assessment, and we partner with them at CEDA. And it's been, I don't know if paradigm shifting is too strong of a word, but it's been transformative at CEDA to at least start introducing these concepts to people of, okay, how you behave has some factors behind it. Understanding those factors can hopefully make you more self-aware and mindful of, okay, this is how I'm coming across, this is how I need to lead, these are my motivating factors. And this is how they interact with this individual who has different motivating factors. How do we find the complementary pieces of it? Because uh, and fit within the team to get the job done at the end of the day. And I think my experience with predictive index at CEDA has just been, again, transformational in helping teams get to that next point.
Yeah, I think it's really powerful that the combination of just who are you, who are we, and what's the work that we're doing together, right? And how do we look at our styles, our strengths, our blind spots individually and collectively, like you said, to get that job done, to focus on that objective to be done, which can change. When the objective changes, the dynamic might change, within that team itself, if that work to be done is a little bit different. And how do you leverage those insights to make those kinds of changes? I think is really powerful and bring awareness.
Yeah, I agree, and I like that. We've used the tool, I think, very strategically and thoughtfully. It's not meant to box people. It's not meant to say this is who you are. It's a generalized understanding, which I really appreciate and like about it, because it can open up people's minds into thinking differently or understanding themselves and how someone else behaves differently, and go, okay, this isn't personal. This person isn't a jerk. It's just these sorts of things tend to set them off in a different way, or they get excited about these things in a different way. So when they come to approach you, they're not but being bombastic. That's just how it tends to manifest themselves. So it's understanding that so you can put people in the right positions and the right situations to leverage their gifts in the best possible way. Because when that can happen, obviously the organization thrives, but also that individual thrives. And I think that should be really what you focus on, is if you can get your staff and your people to thrive, then everything else takes care of itself, quite honestly.
Well, you mentioned the importance of modeling. Leadership is modeling what the good is. And as I listened to you there, what became clear is you explained it from the lens of the employee experience. So yes, it helps to solve problems the business has, and that's important. But the frame was from the employee experience. They gain greater awareness, they have better relationships, and they're in environments where they can do better work. So thank you for that lens.
You're welcome. Yeah, again, I think whether it's not for profit, government, whatever it is, at the end of the day, we've seen this great reshift, or again, whatever you want to call it, the event that shall not be named because everyone's sick of naming it. But I do think one of the right things to do, and I hope we don't start going backwards again, as employers and as a society, but just being respectful of employees and knowing their worth and their value, and bringing that with you into the future is key for successful organizations.
Well, I think that leads to a very good closing question before we thank you for coming. So the question is this: unprecedented change that we shall not mention, as you said, has caused us to realize what was always true, which is we need to reimagine our business, reimagine work. And since you're a human resources professional, let's just ask you, what do you think needs to happen to reimagine HR so we don't go back as you hope we don't?
Yeah, I would highly recommend a book by Lars Schmidt called Redefining HR. And that book can better explain it than I ever could. But the gist of it is essentially, um, we used to be in what was called legacy HR, which is the old joke when HR walks into the room and everyone's laughing and joking and they're all around the water cooler, everybody stops. And they're like, oh, HR's in the room. Who's getting fired today? All that type of stuff. That is legacy human resources. Modern human resources, that's defined in the book and uh, by Lars, has all those things that we kind of talked about today. A lot of it is greater awareness of the employee experience, it's greater experience of redefining how the organization does business. So I highly recommend that anybody in human resources needs to read that book. It needs to be on all their nightstand. And the nice thing about it is it's not unprecedented, right? HR used to be called what? The personnel department,
Yeah.
which made it was even worse than what it is now.
It started completely as an operational function.
It was clearly just
Fill
an
out the
administrative
form.
function.
Administrative, operational.
And so we go from people, personnel to human resources today to what I argue and Lars argue is people operations. That's the future, and it has all those trademarks that you talk about, where we're not just form anymore, right? Now that's part of it. You always are going to have to fill out the I-9s. You can't get rid of that, but you can do it in a different way. It's right. Well, you have to do this. It's like, oh, this is just part of our comprehensive onboarding, and you focus more on the people side of things once all the stuff you have to do is out of the way. So employee experience, working on data, working on all those things that make the organization better. And human resources is not a profit sucking part of it. It's a profit generating part of it.
Yeah.
So
Well said.
redefining HR again.
Well, we're going to put this on our reading list, and I can already tell that you have a unique way of explaining it that's very accessible, and I really appreciate that.
And speaking of books, you have contributed to a book that's launching here in a couple weeks called People Fusion: Best Practices to Build and Retrain a Strong Team. And so as we close out, can you give us a little teaser of what your topic is for your chapter of this book?
Yeah, I'm super excited about this. One of my bucket list items was to be a published author at one time.
Awesome.
So I jumped at the opportunity with Influence Media Network to be a contributing author to this. So maybe not surprisingly, my chapter is titled The HR Philosopher: How Philosophy Can Be a Difference-Making Pursuit for Business Leaders. So I focus on the idea of what I call the philosopher manager, and just taking the philosopher king or queen approach and what makes a philosopher king according to Plato, and using those in a modern scenario and setting. So not to give too much more of that away, but
how can we get a hold of that, and when?
Yeah, January 20th, it will be published on Amazon.com. So just type in People Fusion and it should pop up.
Congratulations. We will also put that in the show notes, and we will do some blogs on it.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, looking forward to it.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Paul, thanks for joining us. This was such a great conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Adrian and Tom. Appreciate you both, and Happy New Year.
You too.
Happy New Year. Thank you for listening to the Leadership Beyond podcast. We hope you benefited from this conversation as much as we have. We invite you to join our community of conversation. Subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Don't forget to sign up at aleadershipbeyond.com for free materials and updates. That's aleadershipbeyond.com. Join us in 2 weeks for our next episode.